Hey guys, tonight we will listen to a calm and gentle story that will help you relax and drift into a deep, peaceful sleep. Before we begin, make your bed comfortable, dim the lights, and allow your body to fully relax. Close your eyes, take slow, deep breaths, and with each breath, feel yourself becoming more and more at ease. Let your mind feel light and happy. Every sound, every word, and every moment of tonight's story will guide you into a serene and peaceful atmosphere. Now, get completely comfortable, open yourself to relaxation, and let yourself be carried away on this peaceful journey. Let's begin the story. Tonight, let's drift back to a world where ambition carved stone and pride held empires together. A place that built highways before maps, plumbing before pipes, and bureaucracy before anyone had invented paperwork fatigue. It's the story of Rome, the empire that conquered the world mostly because it couldn't stand seeing a crooked road. Before you settle in, imagine this. Centuries before satellites and Wi-Fi, a civilization engineered running water, central heating, and political chaos, all with the same level of dedication. The Romans didn't just build cities, they built confidence into concrete. It didn't start with marble statues or emperors giving speeches to thunderous applause. No, it began with a swamp, a muddy patch of land near a river, filled with shepherds yelling across puddles. And somehow, those same muddy people turned their soggy campfire into the center of the ancient world. Rome's first miracle wasn't war, it was plumbing. By the time other tribes were still tossing waste out the window, Rome had already figured out how to make water obey geometry. They tamed rivers with stone, built aqueducts across mountains, and invented pipes before most of Europe had figured out soap. But the real secret behind Rome wasn't divine luck or magical fate. It was their obsession with systems. They conquered boredom before they conquered Gaul. Their engineers dreamed not of flight or poetry but of drainage. They looked at a swamp and thought, let's build a city here. It'll be funny. No power tools, no engines, no YouTube tutorials. Just geometry, labor, and the sheer stubbornness of people who refused to take impossible as an answer. And somehow it all worked. Cities rose with heated floors, sewage systems, and fountains that served no purpose other than to look smug about existing. While the rest of Europe still thought thunder was angry magic, Rome was perfecting water pressure. They believed control was civilization. If nature didn't cooperate, they bullied it into submission, carving mountains, redirecting rivers, and turning deserts into proof of concept. Every invention was a statement. We can, and you can't. Even their ruins still seemed to smirk, standing there for 2,000 years whispering, "Still up, are you?" The real marvel wasn't their gods or their armies. It was their cement. The Romans took an old Greek idea, mixed it with volcanic ash, and created something that refused to crumble. It healed itself with time, like it knew it was too proud to decay. Modern scientists still study it, secretly jealous that ancient builders beat them by a couple thousand years. Their concrete, called opus cementitium, turned cities into eternity. The Pantheon's dome, still the largest unreinforced one on Earth, has survived earthquakes, fires, and tourists. It stands there like a stone shrug. We told you so. While modern buildings crumble after a stiff breeze, Roman structures still hold strong. To them, concrete wasn't just material. It was philosophy, a belief that permanence could be mixed, poured, and shaped by will. But Rome's pride wasn't limited to stone. They wanted life itself to flow on schedule like water. And so they built aqueducts, the ancient veins of civilization. Before Rome, most cities fetched water by hand from rivers, often sharing it with diseases that had better attendants than priests. Rome said, "No thanks," and carved gravity-fed channels that carried clean water from the mountains to over 1 million people. No motors, no pumps, just math, arrogance, and a flawless understanding of slope. They built aqueducts that stretched for miles, curving gently enough that water could glide like silk across the empire. They tunneled through rock, bridged valleys with arches, and made sure every drop arrived right on cue, just enough to fill a bath or a fountain built purely to say, "We're cleaner than you." Yes, they used lead pipes, which might explain why a few emperors thought they were gods or horses, but the system worked. Rome glistened while the rest of the world itched. Public baths steamed from dawn till night, fountains overflowed, and even the poorest could enjoy a rinse that didn't involve a puddle. To Romans, plumbing wasn't luxury. It was identity. Running water meant civilization. Dirt meant barbarism. Ironically, most of Europe would forget that lesson for nearly 1,000 years. And then there was the Cloaca Maxima, the empire's great sewer, and one of humanity's least glamorous masterpieces. Built centuries before Christ, it still flows today, carrying away the remnants of ancient dinners and modern legends. The Romans had figured out something the Middle Ages would lose. A city could be crowded and still clean. They believed hygiene was power. Baths weren't indulgence, they were duty. Senators and slaves bathed side by side, discussing politics while sitting shoulder to shoulder on marble benches with no stalls and a shared sponge. Not exactly private, but undeniably efficient. Rome was obsessed with cleanliness and with proving it. Aqueducts, sewers, and baths weren't just utilities. They were propaganda carved in stone. "Look how civilized we are," they said. "We even wash." Infrastructure was image. Water and pride ran through the empire like twin currents. And while emperors might have gone mad, their cities stayed immaculate, or at least impressively less disgusting than everyone else's. But all that plumbing and concrete meant nothing without roads. Rome's network of stone arteries stretched over 250,000 miles, enough to circle the earth nearly 10 times. They didn't build for convenience, they built for control. Roman roads were perfection layered in stone. Large rocks at the base, gravel in the middle, smooth paving on top, tilted ever so slightly for drainage. Every stretch was measured, marked, and maintained by sheer willpower and slave labor. They weren't paths, they were declarations. "You are part of Rome now. Try rebelling. We'll be there by Tuesday." The Via Appia still survives, ancient stones glimmering beneath modern shoes. A quiet reminder that once upon a time, civilization was measured in straight lines. And while armies marched across those roads, messages followed close behind. The cursus publicus, Rome's courier system, was the ancient version of broadband, fast, reliable, and sometimes intercepted by barbarians. Couriers rode day and night, swapping horses at stations spaced like clockwork, carrying wax tablets and imperial decrees that could cross continents in days. Orders traveled faster than rebellion, and that's what kept Rome alive. It wasn't the sword that held the empire together. It was logistics. When they said all roads lead to Rome, they weren't being poetic. They were being factual because they built all of them. And that's the beauty of Rome's madness. Every invention, every road, every stone was an act of defiance, against nature, against chaos, against time. While the rest of the world waited for divine intervention, Rome just built it. Rome wasn't content with just roads and plumbing. Those were the bones and veins of an empire, but its soul was carved in stone. Roman architecture wasn't just functional, it was bragging that could survive earthquakes. Every building was a flex, every column a statement that whispered, "We figured this out before you did." The Romans didn't believe in subtlety. They believed in scale. They didn't build small temples to impress their gods. They built colossal domes to impress each other. Their architects had one mission: make gravity jealous. They turned math into worship, geometry into propaganda. Walk beneath a Roman arch and you weren't just entering a building, you were stepping into a sermon about power. Take the Colosseum, for instance. An amphitheater that could swallow 50,000 cheering citizens and still have room for the ghosts of accountants who should have taken a day off. It had elevators powered by manpower, retractable awnings to block the sun, and crowd control that would make modern stadiums blush. All that so people could watch lions have lunch. Then there's the Pantheon, that enormous dome still standing 2,000 years later, as if time itself signed a lease. The Romans didn't use steel reinforcements. They just trusted physics and confidence. The circular hole at the top, the oculus, wasn't a flaw. It was divine theater. Sunlight poured through like approval from above, a celestial spotlight for imperial ego. To walk through a Roman basilica or bathhouse wasn't comforting. It was humbling. The ceilings soared, the mosaics glittered, and everything was designed to remind you that the empire was infinite, and you were not. Even their ruins seemed to look down on us, patiently waiting for modern buildings to collapse first. Their favorite tool of intimidation was the arch. Before Rome, architecture was basically a series of flat things, walls, roofs, and disappointment. Then came the arch, a perfect curve that redistributed weight so elegantly that it let Rome build the impossible. Bridges that lasted, aqueducts that soared, and stadiums that refused to fall down even after their creators did. The arch turned engineering into art. Stack enough of them and you get a vault. Stack the vaults and you get cathedrals before cathedrals were cool. Rome didn't just master structure, it weaponized beauty. Triumphal arches, built to celebrate victories, were basically ancient press releases in stone. We won. Please look impressed. Even the materials worked overtime. The same volcanic concrete that held up their harbors underwater still survives today. Divers study those submerged ruins and swear they can almost hear the ghosts of Roman engineers laughing underwater. But Rome wasn't satisfied just building for eternity. They wanted their cities to function like machines. Water wasn't just a resource, it was an employee. Through aqueducts, channels, and clever mechanics, Romans used flowing water to run mills, saw stone, and even power food factories. At a site called Barbegal in what is now France, 16 giant water wheels once ground grain for entire cities. It was the ancient version of an industrial park. No electricity, no engines, just gravity and ambition. Rome turned rivers into assembly lines. They built cranes powered by treadmills, literal human-sized hamster wheels where workers walked to lift multi-ton stones into place. Sounds absurd, but it worked flawlessly. Those treadwheel cranes could hoist columns taller than most modern buildings, powered entirely by sweat and physics. No safety gear, no mercy, just results. Imagine standing at a construction site in 100 CE. The air thick with dust, the sound of pulleys creaking, the foreman yelling in Latin, and a team of barefoot workers walking inside a wooden wall big enough to crush a house if it slipped. Terrifying? Yes. Effective? Absolutely. Everything in Rome was about control over nature, over materials, over comfort. They even invented central heating. The hypocaust system channeled hot air under floors and through hollow walls, turning villas into cozy sanctuaries while the rest of Europe was still figuring out fire. The rich strolled barefoot in January while the barbarians outside were still defrosting by torchlight. They didn't stop at warmth either. Wealthy Romans stored snow from mountains to chill wine and cool dining halls. The empire had invented both heating and air conditioning, powered by math and manpower. Comfort wasn't luxury, it was an expectation. When you step back, you start to see the pattern. Rome didn't just conquer land, it conquered inconvenience. Every invention was a rebellion against discomfort. Plumbing, heating, even the city layout, all designed to make life run smoother for those on top. They were masters of control until control slipped away. Because every empire, no matter how mighty, eventually discovers that walls and arches can't hold back chaos forever. Rome's genius was unmatched, but genius can't survive endless greed, bad emperors, and lead poisoning. The aqueducts still carried water, but the politics started to rot. Roads that once carried legions began carrying rumors. The same pride that built the empire began quietly eroding it from within. When Rome finally fell, its concrete stayed standing, but its knowledge crumbled. The formulas, the engineering, the logistics, all lost in the dark centuries that followed. People walked beneath the same arches their ancestors built and thought they were miracles, not math. And in that silence of history, as Europe forgot how to make straight lines, a new kind of empire began, not of roads or baths, but of faith and intrigue. Far from the dust of the Roman ruins, in a glittering city by the sea called Constantinople, a young girl watched her father lead bears into an arena. Her name was Theodora, and she would rise from that pit of spectacle to a throne draped in purple. Her father was a bear trainer at the Hippodrome, the city's great circus of chariots, cheers, and blood. When he died, Theodora's family fell from the noisy middle of entertainment into poverty. Her mother, desperate, turned to the theater, not the kind with Shakespearean dignity, but the kind with scandal and applause in equal measure. That was the stage Theodora grew up on, half art, half chaos, where a woman's talent was both currency and curse. By her teens, she was already infamous. Dancers copied her routines, poets whispered her name, and the powerful men of Constantinople pretended not to know her, except when the lights went out. But Theodora wasn't just beautiful. She was sharp, observant, and terrifyingly self-aware. She saw the thin line between performer and pawn, and she swore she'd never stay on the losing side. Her life turned from comedy to exile after one wrong affair too many. Cast out from the city, she drifted through Alexandria, the intellectual furnace of the East, where monks debated theology and sailors swore at God in the same breath. It was there, among philosophers and ascetics, that Theodora changed. She began to believe in redemption, not the gentle kind preached in temples, but the fierce, private kind that grows in people who've had to survive everything. She learned humility, but she never lost her edge. When she finally returned to Constantinople, she was no longer the scandalous dancer. She was something far more dangerous, a woman who understood power and had nothing left to lose. And somewhere in the marble halls of the empire, she caught the eye of a man who would change everything: Justinian, the emperor's ambitious nephew, brilliant and awkward in equal measure. He was drawn to her intelligence as much as her presence. He saw in her the mind of a strategist, the wit of a performer, and the courage of someone who'd already walked through ruin and come out shining. Their romance was a scandal. He was destined for the throne. She was barred from marrying anyone of rank. So Justinian did what Romans or Byzantines always did when confronted with a rule they didn't like. He rewrote it. With a single decree, he changed the law and married her. The ex-actress became the empire's empress, and the whispers of Constantinople turned from gossip to awe. Theodora had climbed from the gutters to the throne, not by birthright, but by brilliance. And soon, history would learn that crowns may be forged in gold, but they are worn with fire. When Theodora walked into the great palace of Constantinople, the marble didn't seem to shine any brighter, but the people did look smaller. The city whispered her name like a rumor that refused to die. To the nobles, she was a scandal in silk. To the people, she was proof that fate could be tricked into submission. She didn't come from noble blood or divine prophecy. She came from the theater, from sweat, laughter, and survival. And now she walked beside the man who would soon rule the empire. Justinian adored her, and not in the fragile way kings usually love. He admired her mind, her restraint, her ability to read a room faster than a spy. He was a scholar obsessed with order, law, and the illusion of control. She understood chaos, people, and the art of pretending to be harmless. Together, they were balance and fire, the dream team of ancient politics. When Justinian finally became emperor, Theodora stood beside him in imperial purple. The senators muttered behind jeweled hands, priests prayed extra loudly, and somewhere deep down, history smiled. Because what those men didn't realize was that Theodora wasn't there to decorate the throne. She was there to share it. In council, she was sharper than the generals. She listened when others talked too much and spoke when silence could cut deepest. She reviewed petitions, advised on foreign affairs, and rewrote social policy from the palace's marble corridors. But the empire was restless. Justinian's reforms, though brilliant, squeezed the nobility and angered the masses. Taxes rose, tempers flared, and Constantinople simmered under its golden domes like a pot about to boil over. The spark came, ironically, from entertainment: the chariot races. The Hippodrome, that massive arena where Theodora's father once wrangled bears, was the beating heart of the city. Two teams, the Blues and the Greens, dominated the stands, their rivalries far more political than athletic. What began as sports factions had evolved into violent social clubs, each backed by different power groups. On one cold January day in 532 CE, the cheers turned into war cries. The crowd, united for once, roared a single word that echoed like thunder across the marble: Nika, meaning conquer. It started as a protest over arrests but swelled into a rebellion. The city erupted in fire. Mobs stormed the streets, burning palaces, freeing prisoners, and chanting for a new emperor. For 6 days, Constantinople burned. Senators who resented Justinian secretly cheered from behind their shutters. The mob crowned a rival emperor. The palace walls trembled under the roar of 30,000 rebels. Inside those walls, the imperial court panicked. Advisors begged Justinian to flee, to sail away, regroup, and live to rule another day. He was ready to run. The ships were being prepared. And then Theodora stood. In a calm voice that cut through the chaos, she told the most powerful men in the empire that she would not run. "Royalty is a fine burial shroud," she said, a line that would echo through centuries. To her, dignity was not negotiable. She'd spent her life clawing her way out of humiliation. She wasn't about to crawl back into it. Her defiance broke the fear in the room. Justinian's hesitation hardened into resolve. He ordered his generals, Belisarius and Mundus, to retake the city. What followed was brutal. Soldiers stormed the Hippodrome, sealing every exit. The crowd that had once cheered now screamed. In a single afternoon, tens of thousands were cut down. The rebellion died, and so did mercy. When the smoke cleared, the empire stood, bloodied but intact. Theodora had saved the throne, not by force of arms, but by force of will. Her courage that day became legend. To the people, she was no longer the dancer who married an emperor. She was the empress, the steel beneath the silk. In the years that followed, Theodora's power only grew. She transformed from scandal to sovereign. While Justinian obsessed over laws and buildings, drafting the great legal code that would shape Europe for centuries, Theodora focused on the people the law forgot. She passed reforms protecting women from forced prostitution, created shelters for those escaping exploitation, and expanded rights to own property and inherit wealth. For the first time in Byzantine history, a woman's voice echoed in the empire's legislation, and it was hers. The nobility sneered at her morality. The clergy whispered that she was a hypocrite, but she didn't care. She understood hypocrisy better than any of them. She'd lived it, survived it, and turned it into power. She established the metanoia, the house of repentance, a refuge for women seeking new lives. It wasn't charity. It was retribution disguised as mercy. The world that once used women now had to answer to one. And that terrified everyone. Theodora's influence stretched far beyond compassion. She became Justinian's equal in politics, the silent strategist behind many imperial moves. Ambassadors and bishops quickly learned that speaking to the emperor without consulting the empress was a mistake measured in careers. She had her enemies, plenty of them, the courtiers who mocked her origins, the priests who despised her theology, and the generals who found her intelligence unsettling. But Theodora didn't need their approval. She had their obedience. In the palace, her presence was mythic. She could silence an argument with a glance, end a career with a smile, and build alliances with one well-placed word. She understood that in Constantinople, politics wasn't war, it was theater, and she was the star performer. Even her rivals feared to underestimate her. Among them was Antonina, wife of the great general Belisarius. The two women shared a strange friendship, half alliance, half duel. They plotted together, dined together, and occasionally betrayed each other before dessert. The palace was full of men with swords, but the sharpest weapons were words whispered by women. To her supporters, Theodora was divine wisdom in human form. To her enemies, she was the devil in gold. To history, she was both. But behind the grandeur, there was always the girl who had once stood on a stage, mocked by crowds. She never forgot that pain, and maybe that's what fueled her. The unshakable memory of powerlessness. Her reign, alongside Justinian's, reshaped an empire. And yet, even empresses cannot escape time. Years later, when illness began to whisper through her body, Theodora refused pity. She ruled from her bed, issuing orders, correcting ministers, and scolding anyone who dared to look at her with sadness. She had faced mobs, priests, and assassins. Death at least had the courtesy to knock. When she finally passed, the city mourned her as if the sun had gone out. The same streets that once jeered her name now filled with tears. Justinian, broken by grief, buried her in imperial splendor, not as a queen who married into power, but as the partner who had helped him build it. In the shimmering mosaics of the Church of San Vitale in Ravenna, her image still stares back across time, calm, regal, untouchable. Her story reminds us that the mightiest empires are often rebuilt by those who were never meant to rise. When the lights of the ancient world went out, Europe didn't fall asleep. It started dreaming in armor. Faith replaced philosophy, and the sword replaced the scroll. The world had traded marble for monasteries. Somewhere in that strange mixture of devotion and violence, a new kind of order was born, one that prayed with one hand and drew blood with the other. It began quietly around the year 1190, during the Third Crusade, a mission half holy, half chaotic, where knights and pilgrims flooded the Holy Land, each believing God had personally RSVP'd them to war. Among the camps of Christians besieging Acre, a group of German crusaders built a small field hospital, not for conquest but for care. They called it the Hospital of Saint Mary of the Germans in Jerusalem. It was meant to heal the wounded, feed the starving, and comfort the dying. But in that age, good deeds rarely stayed simple. From that modest tent of mercy, something darker and grander would grow. The Holy Land was crowded with holy orders, the Knights Templar rich and feared, the Hospitallers noble and ancient. The Germans, always fond of structure, decided to create their own. By papal decree, the Hospital of the Germans transformed into a military religious order, a brotherhood of warrior monks known as the Teutonic Knights. They took vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, though history suggests they had flexible interpretations of at least one of those. They wore white cloaks marked with a black cross, symbolizing purity and resolve. Beneath the surface, however, burned an ambition sharper than any sword. Their mission was simple on paper: protect Christian pilgrims and defend the Holy Land. But in reality, they were the embodiment of medieval contradiction, charity wrapped in conquest. While other knights dreamed of glory, the Teutonic Order dreamed of systems. They built fortresses like accountants built ledgers, methodically, perfectly, and everywhere. Castles rose from the sand, their walls smooth and geometric, defying the wildness of the desert. Within them, monks prayed, trained, and managed logistics with military precision. The Teutonic Knights were less a band of warriors and more a medieval corporation, disciplined, hierarchical, and alarmingly efficient. But fate, as usual, had different plans. When Jerusalem finally fell to Muslim forces and the Crusader dream collapsed, the Teutonic Knights found themselves without a stage. Their holy war had ended, but their appetite for order hadn't. So, like any ambitious organization that loses its market, they relocated. Invited by a Polish duke to help convert, or, let's be honest, conquer the pagan tribes of Prussia, the Teutonic Order moved north. From the deserts of the Levant to the frozen forests of the Baltic, they carried the cross and the sword with the same steady hand. There, in the snow and silence, they found their new purpose: building a Christian empire from scratch. The landscape was brutal. Endless pines, frozen rivers, and tribes who didn't exactly welcome baptism by sword. But the knights didn't flinch. They built castles that looked more like equations than architecture. Cold, symmetrical, and terrifyingly precise. Marienburg, their grand headquarters, rose like a brick miracle on the banks of the Nogat River. A fortress of red stone, geometry, and faith. It wasn't just a castle. It was a declaration that discipline could conquer wilderness. Inside, corridors echoed with the rhythm of boots and prayer. Every hour was scheduled, every meal weighed, every sin accounted for. They prayed at dawn, fought at noon, and recorded both victories and confessions with equal neatness. Their order was a blend of army, monastery, and government. They taxed, judged, and preached. They built roads, churches, and schools not out of kindness but out of policy. Civilization, for them, was simply conquest with better handwriting. They called it the Northern Crusade, but it was less a crusade and more a campaign of transformation. Forests were cleared for fields, pagans baptized or buried, towns founded with German names that rolled off the tongue like commands. And for a while it worked. The Teutonic Order became one of the most powerful states in medieval Europe. Their control stretched from the Vistula to the Gulf of Finland, a cold empire ruled by monks who wore armor under their robes. But success breeds arrogance, and arrogance invites history's favorite guest: downfall. The order grew rich, their coffers filled with tithes and tribute. Their purity dulled, their humility faded. They began to act less like servants of God and more like kings of the north. And as all empires eventually learn, the bigger you build, the louder the silence that follows. Still, for nearly 2 centuries, the Teutonic Knights stood unshaken, a machine of faith and steel humming across the frozen plains. Their castles rose like punctuation marks on the landscape, each one a reminder that once belief had battalions. Their flag, white and black, fluttered above cities that hadn't existed before they arrived. The people spoke their prayers and their language, both learned at sword point. And yet, beneath that polished order, the ground was already trembling. The same discipline that built their empire would soon turn into rigidity. The same faith that fueled their rise would blind them to change. And the same sword that won them kingdoms would eventually break in their hands. But that's for another night. For now, imagine them. Silent ranks of knights standing in snow, torches flickering on steel helmets, prayers murmured like wind through pine. A brotherhood that believed heaven had spreadsheets and that salvation could be measured in miles of conquered land. They were the last echo of Rome's obsession with order and the first whisper of modern bureaucracy. And like all great machines of history, they forgot the one truth Rome had once learned the hard way. Perfection may last longer than people, but it never lasts forever. The Teutonic Knights believed they were building forever. And for a while it looked like they were right. Their castles multiplied like frost, each one identical, disciplined, and glinting in the pale light of the Baltic sun. Their banners flew from Riga to Königsberg, symbols of divine authority etched on every blade of ice. They had turned faith into infrastructure. Their empire didn't bloom, it crystallized. But no one rules the north without paying rent to winter, and history always collects. At first, expansion came easily. The Prussians had fallen, their old gods silenced beneath cathedral bells. The order moved west and east, baptizing with one hand, burning with the other. Towns grew, taxes flowed, and the chronicles recorded victory after victory, as if heaven itself were keeping score. They called their territory Ordensstadt, the order state. It was a country without kings, run by men who answered to a grand master instead of a crown. The grand master ruled from Marienburg, a fortress so perfect it felt like geometry had become religion. Inside its red brick walls, the knights ate in silence, prayed in rhythm, and managed an empire with ledger books instead of loots. Every corner was measured, every hour accounted for. If God watched over them, he probably admired their scheduling. But power has a way of turning prayers into policies. The more the knights built, the more they wanted. Their neighbors, Poland, Lithuania, and the scattered tribes beyond, were less thrilled by the prospect of conversion by siege. The Teutonic Knights saw them as pagans or heretics. The locals saw them as unwanted accountants with swords. Lithuania, wild and pagan longer than any other European land, became their greatest obsession. To the order, its forests were uncharted sin waiting to be saved. To Lithuania's princes, those forests were home, and they weren't interested in swapping gods for taxes. For decades, the Teutonic Knights waged a frozen war along that border. Raids, crusades, retaliations. The lines on the map changed every season, but the bitterness stayed. And then something unexpected happened. The so-called pagans got organized. In 1386, Grand Duke Jogaila of Lithuania made a move that changed the entire game. He converted to Christianity, not because he'd seen the light, but because he'd seen the opportunity. By marrying Queen Jadwiga of Poland, he united two kingdoms into one, a massive multi-ethnic empire right on the Teutonic doorstep. The Teutonic Knights, who had built their entire brand around converting heathens, suddenly found their favorite enemy inconveniently baptized. It was a PR disaster. You can't fight a holy war against Christians, at least not officially. But the Knights weren't the type to give up good real estate over theology. So, they argued that Lithuania's conversion was fake, that its new king was just pretending. Convenient reasoning, if a bit heretical. Wars resumed, as wars tend to when pride meets paperwork. For years, the tension simmered. Border raids, political insults, alliances shifting like ice in the spring. The order, rich and rigid, underestimated its opponents. Poland and Lithuania, once rivals, now moved like a single vast organism, one brain, two claws. The breaking point came in the summer of 1410. The Teutonic Grand Master, Ulrich von Jungingen, assembled his knights, the cream of Christendom's warrior class. Tens of thousands of armored men marched beneath the Black Cross. Behind them rolled supply wagons, priests, and banners gleaming under the Baltic sun. Across the fields, the Polish-Lithuanian army gathered. A strange alliance of Slavs, Balts, and even Muslim Tatars, united by one shared desire, to end the order's arrogance once and for all. The place was called Grunwald. On July 15th, under a heavy summer sky, the two armies faced each other. The knights were confident. They were disciplined, armored, and convinced God had a favorite, and that he wore a white cloak with a black cross. The enemy, they thought, was too mixed, too unholy, too messy to win. But the universe loves irony. When the horns sounded, the battlefield erupted. A storm of steel, banners, and shouts in half a dozen languages. The knights charged first, their lances breaking through the front lines, their armor gleaming like mirrors in the sun. For hours, chaos ruled. Dust rose like smoke. Horses screamed. The Teutonic banners wavered but held, until they didn't. Lithuanian cavalry, thought to have fled, suddenly returned, circling behind. Polish knights surged forward. The order's perfect lines fractured. Discipline turned into confusion. The Grand Master fought like a man who couldn't believe the math had gone wrong. When he fell, struck down amid the crush of bodies, the Black Cross fell with him. By sunset, the field was a graveyard. Nearly the entire leadership of the Teutonic Order lay dead. The survivors fled back to their castles, clutching whatever pride hadn't been trampled into the mud. Grunwald wasn't just a defeat, It was humiliation on a divine scale. The empire of discipline had met the chaos of humanity, and chaos had won. The order limped on for a while. Their castles still stood. Their rituals continued, but the pulse of power had faded. They paid reparations, signed treaties, and slowly dissolved into the background of history. Bureaucrats where once they had been conquerors. By the 16th century, their last Grand Master, Albrecht of Brandenburg, converted to Protestantism and turned what was left of the Teutonic state into a duchy under Polish control. The once mighty crusaders became noble landlords, still neat, still punctual, but no longer holy. The black cross faded into heraldry. The white cloak hung in museums. And yet, somewhere in those cold ruins, the echo remains. The sound of boots on stone, of prayers whispered before battle, of an empire built not on greed, but on the illusion that order could last forever. History always disagrees. The Teutonic Knights had begun as healers, become conquerors, and ended as administrators. Their story, like Rome's and Theodora's before them, was another proof of the oldest truth. Power builds, power blinds, and then power burns. But for centuries, as snow fell on the ramparts of Marienburg and candles flickered in its chapels, the world believed they were untouchable. Men so devoted that even winter obeyed their schedules. And when you stand before those ruins today, the silence feels almost devout, as if the stones are still praying for a perfection that never existed.